The Last of Us Season 1 ended a week ago. It is one of, if not my favorite video games of all time, and the adaptation absolutely did the story justice in my opinion, and I want to talk about it. So like I've done for Top Gun, Maverick, and RRR, and some other stories that I've really enjoyed, I'm going to use Star Wars as an excuse to talk about The Last of Us. How can we look at Joel and Ellie's story through the lens of Star Wars? How does it explore similar themes, but in a completely different way? First, let's address the surface level stuff. The Last of Us is about a mercenary played by Pedro Pascal delivering a very special child to safety, encountering allies and enemies and sometimes even hordes of monsters along the way, just like The Mandalorian. Yeah, of course that stuff is fun to point out, but I want to dig deeper, and full spoilers for the first video game and first season of the show are ahead, so be warned. There is more I could say about the second game and what's to come in Season 2, but I'm gonna avoid all of that in this video, but be careful in the comments just in case. Neil Druckmann, one of the writers and directors of the game, who also wrote, directed, and produced the television show with Craig Mazin, said that The Last of Us is about how love is the most powerful force in the universe, and that's not always a good thing. For a very quick recap, the world falls apart at the start of the story. A fungal infection starts to wipe out humanity. Joel's daughter Sarah dies at the start of the outbreak. 20 years later, he is completely jaded and emotionally cut off from everyone else. He is hired to smuggle a young girl named Ellie to a hospital across the country. Ellie is immune to the infection, and they want to use her to create a vaccine. During their journey, they grow close, and despite his best efforts, Joel comes to love Ellie as a daughter. When they finally arrive at the hospital, he learns that her brain has to be removed to be studied. She has to die. Refusing to lose her the same way he lost Sarah, he saves Ellie and murders everyone who gets in his way. Joel is so scared of losing Ellie that he potentially dooms the entire world. That sure sounds familiar to a Star Wars character I know, Anakin Skywalker. His greatest weakness in the prequels is also tied to a fear of loss. He is afraid to leave his mother to become a Jedi. When he has dreams of her death, he tries and fails to save her, believing he could have if only he were more powerful. When he starts to have dreams of his wife's death, the love he has for her and specifically his fear of losing her is easily manipulated. He falls to the dark side, commits unspeakable acts, basically kills anyone who gets in the way of saving Padme. His actions doom the entire galaxy to live under the rule of a Sith Lord and his empire, and then Anakin loses his wife anyway. Star Wars has a lot to say about fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Anger, fear, aggression, the dark side of the Force are they. Easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight. Greed and the fear of loss are the roots that lead to the tree of evil. Fear is a great motivator. I love those last two quotes from the Clone Wars especially, but all of Star Wars' talk about fear is relevant to Anakin, of course, but also applies just as well to Joel. They both fear losing someone they love and are willing to do anything to avoid that pain. Now I want to bring up another Star Wars quote. That's how we're gonna win, not fighting what we hate, saving what we love. Irvin Kershner, director of The Empire Strikes Back, said something similar about the rebels in his film. That's the difference between the rebels and the Empire. It's possible to fight because you love, not just because you hate. I bring up those quotes because I think we have to look at the fact that Anakin and Joel are acting out of love. They are fighting to save what they love. So how do we reconcile that? One Star Wars quote is telling us to fight and save what we love, and another is telling us not to give in to the fear of losing what we love. Well, which is it? Can these quotes coexist? Yes, they can. There is a lot of talk about the Jedi and attachment, and this is what it all comes down to. Jedi can and should love. I think Anakin is right when he tells Padme that Jedi are meant to be compassionate and that they should love the people of the galaxy, but possessive love is where things become dangerous. One of my favorite passages on how Jedi should view attachments is from a middle grade book, Race to Crash Point Tower. Being a Jedi doesn't mean cutting yourself off from love or not having emotions. It means finding balance within those emotions to be able to still seek out the light. In Anakin's case, he was so blinded and motivated by his fear that he never stopped to consider what was right. We see throughout the Clone Wars series that his love is possessive, jealous, greedy, and controlling. Not all the time, but we see how quickly he can give into those emotions. Because like Yoda said, the emotions that drive the dark side flow easily. Staying with the light side is the harder thing to do, especially when someone or something you love is involved. I think Neil Druckmann's description of The Last of Us fits the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker's fall just as well. Love is the most powerful force in the galaxy, but that's not always a a good thing. If you let your love stray into possessiveness and selfishness, you will find yourself willing to do anything to protect it, maybe even doom the world or the galaxy. Anakin would definitely argue that everything he did for love, but to quote Brooklyn Nine-Nine, cool motive, still murder. So, how do you know when you're going too far? How do you know when you've lost your way? One of the big problems I see with both Anakin and Joel is that they take away the choices of the people they claim to love. Anakin tells Padme about the dreams of her death, but refuses to listen to her comfort. He doesn't ask her how far she would like him to go to potentially save her life, and I'm sure she would have drawn the line well before youngling murder and betraying everything they stand for. Joel's situation is a little more complicated, because Ellie is unconscious and in surgery by the time he has to decide to save her or let her go. Nobody knows for sure what Ellie would have wanted in that situation. Does she want to sacrifice her life on the hope that a vaccine can be created? Personally, I think her conversation with Joel after they see the giraffes means she would, but we don't know. Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, didn't ask. She just put Ellie in surgery. Joel couldn't ask either, but even if he knew she was okay with dying, I don't think it would have mattered to him. I think he still would have done what he did, and I think the same is true for Anakin. Both characters were acting to save someone they loved, yes, but for selfish reasons, because they couldn't bear the thought of losing someone close to them again. It wasn't about what Padme or Ellie wanted, it was about what Anakin and Joel wanted. One of my favorite relevant Star Wars quotes is from the Dr. Aphra comics that says, "Evil is a measure of how much your choices take away other people's." Anakin and Joel took away the choices of Padme and Ellie. I'm being very critical of their actions, but I want to make it clear that I am not saying I would do any better in Joel's situation. In fact, when I played The Last of Us for the first time, the second I heard Ellie was in surgery and she was going to die, I didn't think twice about killing every single Firefly in that hospital. I was rooting for him to doom the world. I remember kicking in the door to the operating room and shooting the doctor without hesitation. The game wanted me to feel that way, and it worked. I saved Ellie, doomed the world, then watched Joel lie to her, and I had no regrets. Granted, that was 10 years ago. Playing the game just a couple months ago, I felt very differently about what I had to make Joel do. Now that the season finale has aired, I really enjoyed how tragic they made that sequence. It was not presented as heroic at all. It was a desperate man brutally murdering even people who surrendered to him. I hesitate to call the Fireflies the good guys of the story, but they are more closely associated with the Rebel Alliance than the Galactic Empire. The music and the sound design of Joel's rampage through the hospital reminded me of Anakin's assault on the Jedi Temple or the slaughter of the Separatist Council. And yet, I still can't argue whether Joel is fully right or fully wrong. People have been debating this decision since the game released a decade ago. It's easy to say someone else should make a huge sacrifice for the survival of humanity, but it's a completely different situation when you have to make that sacrifice. Obviously, I love Star Wars, and I agree with its philosophy and morality, but it's usually presented in black and white. The Last of Us shows a very similar dilemma without an obvious right or wrong answer. When Andor was on, I talked a lot about how Star Wars often presents us with an ideal to strive for. Mon Mothma is like the ideal leader for a rebellion, a mythical and noble ruler. But Luthen Rael is probably the more realistic character, the man willing to burn his own soul and do terrible things for someone else's future, which is exactly what Joel does for Ellie. But while Luthen burns his soul and sacrifices lives for the sake of the entire galaxy, Joel burns his soul to sacrifice the world for the sake of one person. Hopefully, none of us will ever have to be in a position where we have to choose between our loved ones and the fate of the entire world or galaxy. My point is that Joel and Anakin's epic, larger-than-life stories are cautionary tales about how we can make selfish choices, thinking they are motivated by love, when in reality, they are motivated by fear. And it can be a difficult thing to recognize. Yes, we should love and feel our emotions and make attachments, that's all part of life, but make sure you find the balance to be able to still seek out the light, even in the most difficult of times, which you already know is a Star Wars quote, but the Fireflies would say something similar. When you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. I hope you enjoyed this different video about a completely different franchise, even when we're in the middle of The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch. If you liked this video, I've got similar ones on Top Gun Maverick and RRR, two of my favorite movies of last year. If you've got other movies or games or stories you'd like to see me cover like this, leave them in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for like 99% Star Wars videos, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.